Last month, Apple made an announcement that barely cracked the headlines. They're opening Siri, the world's most used voice assistant, to every major AI company on Earth: Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, or whoever comes next, all of them competing to be the brain inside your iPhone. Think about what that means for a second. Google has spent hundreds of billions of dollars building one of the most powerful AI systems in history, and its best shot at reaching people, its distribution prize, is getting Apple to let it live inside Siri. So today we're going to break down exactly how Apple pulled this off, why the company that looks like it's losing the AI race might actually be the only one that figured out how to win it. Welcome to Finance Untold. Let's dive in. To understand how Apple pulled this off, you first need to understand what the deal actually is, because the press coverage mostly missed the financial mechanics underneath it. When Apple unveiled Apple Intelligence at its 2024 developer conference, the tech press focused on the features: new emoji, smarter autocorrect, rewritten notifications. But the real story wasn't the features, it was the business model sitting underneath them. Apple is not paying OpenAI cash for the ChatGPT integration. The full terms were never publicly disclosed, but according to sources briefed on the arrangement, Apple's compensation is distribution, access to the 2.5 billion active Apple devices that live in people's pockets around the world. No cash changes hands. Apple pays in eyeballs. And OpenAI is not the only one who took that deal. Google is in, and others will follow, because as of last month, Apple has confirmed it's opening Siri to any AI provider that wants in, turning the world's most used voice assistant into an open platform, where AI companies compete for the privilege of being the default intelligence on your iPhone. Apple's position is essentially this: getting onto the iPhone is worth more than any check we could write, and every major AI company on Earth is agreeing with them. But here's the part of the Google deal that nobody fully reported when it was announced. Apple didn't just get access to Gemini. According to sources with direct knowledge of the arrangement, Apple got complete access to the full Gemini model running inside Apple's own data centers, and the right to distill it. That means Apple can take Google's world-class AI, compress it into smaller specialized models, and run those models directly on your iPhone without touching a Google server. Think of it this way: most people assumed Apple licensed the meal. What they actually got was the recipe. But the deals with AI providers are only part of the story. To see the full scope of what Apple is doing, you have to look at the numbers its rivals are putting up. In 2025, Meta, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon combined spent approximately $400 billion in capital expenditure, the vast majority of it on AI infrastructure, data centers, and NVIDIA chips that cost as much as luxury cars. In 2026, that number is expected to climb towards $700 billion across the four companies. To put that in human terms, Microsoft, Google, and Meta alone are spending more than $450 billion this year. That works out to roughly $14,000 every single second, around the clock, every day of the year. Apple's capital expenditure on AI over the same period is a fraction of that. While its rivals are racing to build the most powerful models, Apple is building almost nothing in comparison. Instead, it's doing something more strategically interesting. It's building a marketplace. Here's what that means in practice. Apple has opened Siri to any AI provider that wants in: ChatGPT today, Gemini, or Claude tomorrow, whoever builds the best model next year. Rather than betting its balance sheet on a single winner, Apple has created a competitive platform where AI companies fight for the privilege of being the default intelligence inside the world's most used consumer device. Apple doesn't lose a server rack either way. The companies racing to win the AI war are, in effect, spending hundreds of billions of dollars to make Apple's product more valuable, and Apple's balance sheet barely moves. Now, how does any of this translate into actual revenue? Because so far, we've been talking about what Apple isn't spending. Here's what it is earning. Apple's services division, the App Store, iCloud, Apple Music, licensing deals, and payment processing, generated $109 billion in revenue in fiscal year 2025. For context, that's more revenue than Nike, Goldman Sachs, and American Express produce in a year, combined. And it carries margins that hardware sales simply cannot match. The AI layer sits on top of that existing machine. When a user upgrades to a paid AI subscription through an iPhone app, whether that's ChatGPT Plus, Gemini Advanced, or whatever comes next, Apple takes between 15 and 30% of every transaction. They didn't train the model, they didn't pay for the infrastructure or hire the researchers. They process the payment and collect the commission. Every AI company that wants access to iPhone users has to go through Apple's payment system. There is no workaround. And that's before Apple starts charging directly. Analysts are now expecting Apple to launch its own subscription tier, potentially called Apple Intelligence Plus, by late 2026. Think about what that means. Apple spent years watching Netflix, Spotify, and YouTube build subscription businesses on top of its platform, taking a cut of every payment. Now it's building its own subscription on top of someone else's AI. The toll collector is becoming the landlord. Apple has approximately $130 billion in cash and marketable securities on its balance sheet. That gives it what investors call patient capital, the ability to watch a market develop without being forced to act. While its rivals are under pressure to deploy capital aggressively just to stay competitive, Apple has the luxury of waiting to see which AI model actually wins before deciding how deeply to commit. There's a broader principle at work here that's worth naming directly. It's the difference between building the technology and owning the interface. Building AI is expensive, risky, and becoming increasingly commoditized. Every few months, a new model arrives that outperforms the previous generation. And we didn't even take into account all the free open-source models from China. The companies spending hundreds of billions to build these models are in a perpetual race with no obvious finish line. The interface is a different business entirely. The lock screen that 2 billion people look at dozens of times a day, the device that sits on your nightstand, travels in your pocket, and processes your payments. That real estate does not get disrupted by a better algorithm. It compounds, and Apple owns it outright. So is Apple behind in AI? Or is it the only company that recognized from the beginning that the arms race itself was the trap? For 2 years, the tech press wrote Apple off. No GPU clusters, no frontier model, nor splashy AI announcement. While Microsoft was deploying Copilot across its entire product suite and Google was rebranding everything around Gemini, Apple was adding emoji. And the criticism wasn't entirely wrong. Apple has missed nearly every deadline it set for itself on AI. Features promised for 2025 are now being pushed toward iOS 27 in September. The upgraded Siri Apple showed the world at its developer conference nearly 2 years ago still isn't fully here. And here's a detail that almost nobody reported. Apple spent approximately $4.5 billion building its own private cloud compute infrastructure to power Apple Intelligence. Roughly 90% of that server capacity is currently sitting idle in warehouses because Apple Intelligence adoption has been far lower than the company projected. By any normal measure of execution, Apple has stumbled badly. And yet, none of it has mattered, because while Apple was missing its own deadlines, OpenAI and Google were racing to fill the gap. Here's the number that tells the whole story. Google currently pays Apple approximately $20 billion a year to be the default search engine on Apple devices, a deal confirmed in U.S. antitrust court documents. Now Apple is paying Google $1 billion a year for Gemini to power Siri. The money flows in both directions. Apple is net positive on the relationship by roughly $19 billion a year, and getting a world-class AI assistant in the process. Every advance in AI from either company makes the iPhone more capable. But here's the twist that reframes this entire story. Apple isn't just the toll collector sitting back and watching others build. While that's been happening in public, something else has been happening in private. Apple is developing its own dedicated AI server chip, codenamed Baltra, in partnership with Broadcom. Mass production is planned for the second half of 2026. Apple-built AI data centers to house those chips are expected to come online in 2027. The company that everyone said had no AI strategy has been quietly building the infrastructure to own the entire stack, from the device in your pocket to the server processing your request. The Google deal isn't the destination, it's the bridge while Baltra gets built. We'll dive deeper into this in a later video. So the next time you see a world-changing AI announcement, it's worth asking one question before anything else. How does this technology actually get to the person using it? Because whoever controls that last step, the device, the interface, the payment system, is the one collecting the toll. If you found this entertaining and informative, like and subscribe. We'll be covering how this plays out as Apple's AI strategy develops, including when Baltra goes into production and what it means for the AI infrastructure race.